This is Amie Meditz, and I am here to present the COVID-19 vaccine, the necessity, the efficacy, and safety. The providers at Beacon Center for Infectious Diseases, which include Mark and I, as well as Heather Pouget and Todd Turner and Alicia Maltzman, want to try to relay to you what we see in the miraculous act of science and why we wholeheartedly support the efficacy and safety of the COVID-19 vaccine. So here's the problem. The COVID-19 pandemic is a major public health threat, the worst in modern times. Worldwide, there's 71 million cases and 1.6 million deaths. In the United States, 16 million cases and 300,000 deaths. What this looks like, and Dr. Pouget gave me this analogy, this is like 15 747s falling out of the sky every day and people dying. Colorado does not have the highest state level of cases and deaths, but is still impressive with almost 4,000 deaths. Our hospitalization rate here in Colorado remains almost 2 times what it was at the beginning of the pandemic in April. And we recently reached an all-time high in Colorado. The magnitude of this problem is difficult to process, honestly. The messenger RNA vaccines are really a true scientific advancement. This technology was really conceived almost 20 years ago. This vaccine actually does not contain live, attenuated, or inactivated virus. What it is a synthetic messenger RNA that encodes a specific protein that is delivered to our cells, and then this protein is made by our bodies, and then made by our body's cellular machinery, and then we develop an immune response. Messenger RNA is a very fragile molecule, and actually this has been some of the limitations with this technology. It cannot reach our DNA, which is contained in the nucleus of our cells. It's impossible for it to get there, so it cannot alter your DNA. Remember, the spike protein is important because it's actually what the virus uses to bind to our cells via the ACE receptor. So this is really a perfect molecule to develop an immune response because it prevents it binding to our cells. But to be clear, this process of creating this vaccine used existing technology to develop this novel vaccine. Next slide. I want to dive into how these vaccines work a little bit more because it's probably the most common question that we receive on the floors. So at the top of this slide is the synthetic messenger RNA. They encased it in this lipid bubble, which are those little dots that look like they have tails. They kind of look like tadpoles a little bit to me. So this lipid particle becomes near to our cell, and here pictured is an antigen presenting cell. And it fuses with the cell, releasing the messenger RNA into inside of the cell, which is called the cytoplasm. Then it interacts with some of the cellular machinery of our body, and this cellular machinery is called a ribosome, and that translates this into proteins. That protein then is moved to the surface of this antigen presenting cell, where many parts of our immune system can respond to this. This is critical because this is putting this foreign material on the top of our cells, allowing our body to develop a lasting immune response. This technology is a highly effective way to develop an immune response using our body's own cellular machinery. I think this technology is just so amazing that somebody thought of this idea. Such a great way for our body to develop an immune response. Next slide. This is probably another thing that I've heard that people feel anxious about, is how did we get to this so quickly? Well, on the right side of your slide, I've created a graphic. So billions of dollars, I would probably list that first. Second, the collaborative science that was going on. People were sharing information. We went from knowing the genetic code of this virus to vaccine within weeks. It was just an amazing progress. The other piece that I've already alluded to is the existing messenger RNA vaccine technology. And this is what has allowed us to create this vaccine. I want to emphasize that really no steps were skipped. The level of disease that's in our community allowed scientists to go right into phase 3 trials. So basically, to show that a vaccine is efficacious, the disease has to be present so that you can study the treatment group versus a placebo group. And obviously, we already talked about how bad the disease is across the world, and this allowed scientists to study this. Using phase 3 trial, which is the gold standard for efficacy, safety, for everything from medications, interventions, and vaccines. And I just kind of also listed Operation Warp Speed here in the United States, which provides funding for all of these various levels. This was an unprecedented process. I agree, but it was for an unprecedented time. Next slide. So this is the greatest slide to be able to present. My prior scientific background when I was presenting I never got to present a slide this robust. The COVID-19 vaccine efficacy was a home run. So here in this chart is the vaccine, which is listed as BNT162b2. That was just the name that they gave it before they came up with the formal name. And in that group, there were, in people who were vaccinated, over 20,000 people were vaccinated. 8 cases of symptomatic COVID occurred and 1 severe case. Now, severe in this definition is a little different than our definitions. Basically, they used a cutoff of 94% saturation or less, and this person had that, but they never required hospitalization and they never required O2 supplementation. So it's a very soft definition of severe. And compared to the placebo group, where there were 162 cases of symptomatic COVID and 9 severe cases, this gave the efficacy of 95%. Just an amazing, very efficacious intervention. And I really want to mention one of the other very important things about this trial is they really focused on trying to have a more diverse group of people that participated in the study. And the efficacy was demonstrated across racial and ethnic groups, including Latinx and African Americans, as well as sex or gender and age. Just as a reminder, 2 doses of this vaccine are required to achieve efficacy, and the protection isn't immediate. It takes up to 2 weeks after the second dose to be fully vaccinated. So I'm going to be turning this over to Mark here in a second, but this efficacy greatly exceeds the FDA threshold of 50%. So, I mean, again, home run. So I'm passing it off to my colleague, Dr. Mark King.
Thanks, Amie. I'm going to move on, but before I move on to the vaccine side effects, that last slide to me is one of the most incredible pieces of data I've seen in my entire career. It is really phenomenal to achieve 95% efficacy. And I will openly say at the beginning of vaccine development, I was skeptical about how effective we would be. And with this new mRNA technology, it has just exceeded expectations beyond belief. And I am so excited that we have a vaccine of this caliber and effectiveness with a really good safety profile too that I'm going to walk through to begin administering to our healthcare workers later this afternoon. Next slide, please. So these are the vaccine side effects, and this slide shows 4 different vaccines. On the far left-hand side is Shingrix, that's a vaccine. that's provided for shingles, and it is notorious for having significant local side effects. I've gotten Shingrix vaccine, and I can tell you that it was very tolerable. Next to that is the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, which we will begin administering here. Next to that is a flu vaccine, and then the fourth column is placebo, and you can see placebo is not without side effects. And then in the final column is the Moderna vaccine. I'm really going to focus on the Pfizer vaccine. The Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine are fairly similar, but transient side effects with this vaccine are not uncommon. And so just to go down the list here, these side effects were looked at 7 days after receipt of the first and second vaccine. So these are relatively, these are side effects that occur within a short period of vaccination. And you can see local pain, arm pain is very common, 83% of the participants. However, redness and swelling associated with that arm pain were relatively infrequent. Myalgia, pain, and fatigue both stand out as very common. I can tell you I will trade that fatigue for the fatigue I've had continuing to deal with this virus over the last 9 months in a very short time frame. Headache also was relatively number common, and most of those were below temperatures. They considered fever above 38 degrees. Higher fevers were considered 38.9 or above, and those were really infrequent. Gastrointestinal symptoms in a small number of people for an overall side effect profile showing that 26% of people who received the vaccine did have some immediate side effects. But overall, these side effects are transient and for the most part well tolerated. The side effect profile is more common after the second vaccine. So these were more prominent after people received their second dose at 21 days. And they are more common in people under the age of 55. But again, just to emphasize, these are transient and generally well tolerated. Next slide, please. In terms of other safety events that were evaluated during the vaccine trial, lymphadenopathy did stand out as being more common in vaccine recipients. 64 vaccine recipients had local lymphadenopathy compared to 6 in the placebo group. This is probably not a bad thing. This is just your immune system doing what it's supposed to do. And so I don't view this as problematic, and this was transient and just says you're getting a good response to the vaccine. Bell's palsy, which is a neurologic condition where the seventh nerve causes facial nerve palsy, is a common disease that we see all the time. This occurred in 4 vaccine recipients and no placebo recipients. It's unknown if the vaccine and Bell's palsy are tied together or if this simply was what we'd expect as a background rate of Bell's palsy in the population, because this is generally not outside that incidence rate. Guillain-Barré syndrome, which was a concern with swine flu vaccine in 1976, was not shown to occur in any of these cases. And so this is also very reassuring that there are no concerning signals for significant adverse events, including long-term events. We do have to acknowledge that this vaccine has only been studied for approximately 2 to 2.5 months after people participated. So there may be some unknown side effects that we are unaware of. We feel good that's going to be of low likelihood because those side effects that occur most of the time that are more serious, like Guillain-Barré syndrome, tend to crop up within the first 6 weeks of receiving a vaccine. In order to understand safety of this vaccine in the long term, a standard process, which is the second bullet here, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, which is a standard system through the CDC for all vaccines, is going to continue in existence. And if you have a side effect, you can certainly report to the system based on the URL there to let the CDC know what is going on in terms of side effects. These phase 4 side effects, things we see after a phase 3 trial, we learn more about side effects when those are really ferreted out, but that often takes years to fully understand. There's a new phone app called vSafe, and you will get information when you get vaccinated of how to sign up for vSafe. It requires being vaccinated to sign up. And so this is a new active monitoring tool that we want everybody to sign up for because we want to understand as best we can the safety of this vaccine moving forward. It is in Spanish and English. You do not have to provide personal information, and it just requires your smartphone. And so we feel very strongly that vaccine safety monitoring is important. We don't want to sort of close the door on that monitoring moving forward. Next slide, please. So who should get a COVID-19 vaccine? So as you all know, this vaccine was approved under an emergency use authorization. And as Amie pointed out, we're in unprecedented times, and this is what's required in unprecedented times. But no typical measures to ensure safety and efficacy were skipped. And so the vaccine is approved under the EUA for 16 years and older, provided that we have adequate vaccine supply. Individuals who have underlying medical conditions are still recommended to get the vaccine. This is, again, not a live vaccine, so there's no risk of the patient developing the disease from the vaccination itself. And individuals who've had prior infection with SARS-CoV-2, we do recommend they get the vaccine. We still don't understand the long-term immunologic response to natural infection. And so we do believe people who have had prior disease should still get vaccinated to maximize their protection in the future. You do not need viral or serologic testing for active or prior infection to determine if you need vaccine. We do want you to be outside of any 10-day isolation period and symptom-free if you had prior COVID-19 to protect the people that will be providing vaccinations. And you can wait as long as 90 days because we do feel pretty good that people will have immunity during that time frame. And if people feel more comfortable who have had COVID-19, you can wait that 90-day period and then get vaccinated. Next slide, please. Just to reiterate in terms of who should get this, patients with HIV infection, other immunocompromising conditions, or those who take other immunosuppressive medications can get this vaccine. Those groups are not as well represented in a study as healthy individuals, and so data is lacking in terms of understanding exactly the safety and efficacy, but we really don't have any reason to suspect the safety would be any different in an immunocompromised population. The efficacy potentially could be less because there's just potential for reduced immune response in people who are receiving or have underlying immunosuppressive conditions. When they rolled this vaccine out in England, they did see they had a couple of patients who received the vaccine develop anaphylaxis. We're still trying to sort out what triggered anaphylaxis in these patients, and the leading theory is it may be related to polyethylene glycol in the vaccine. And so the current recommendation is if you've had prior anaphylaxis to a vaccination, the ACIP, which is the CDC advisory group for vaccinations, is recommending that you don't get vaccinated currently. However, if you're in that category, we would ask that you reach out to one of us because we would certainly be happy to discuss that further with you and to decide is there a safe way to get you vaccine because we want everyone to be protected. Really no other categories of allergy are excluding people from getting this vaccine. For people who don't have significant allergies or prior anaphylaxis, our slide here says 30 minutes for monitoring. It's actually, we're going to be doing 15 minutes for most people. If you have a history of anaphylaxis, we might ask you to stay for 30 minutes after your vaccination, but in general, it will be a shorter time frame. So it's really important to understand there are very few limitations on who can get this vaccine. Next slide, please. That moves us into another category of can pregnant persons get COVID-19 vaccination? And so, as you can imagine, most vaccine trials historically and currently have not included pregnant persons as part of the study group. And so we don't have great data to say yes or no. There's been a lot of ethical debate about should this group be included or offered the vaccine or not. And the bottom line is, it's come down where the recommendation from both the Food and Drug Administration and the CDC are pregnant women should be offered vaccination. And so that's what we're going to do here at BCH. And so how do you decide if you're in that category of pregnancy, if you want to receive this vaccine or not? And some of that is dependent on, obviously, you work in healthcare. What's the level of COVID-19 community transmission? And currently, we still have high levels of transmission in Colorado. What's your exact personal risk of contracting COVID-19? What do you do outside of your workplace that might put you at risk? We don't know for certain what are the risks of COVID-19 to pregnant persons and to the fetus. We do know, however, that pregnancy increases the risk of severe illness and severe outcomes from COVID-19. So we feel like the benefit of vaccinations protection is going to outweigh the risk of natural disease. Again, the efficacy and side effects of vaccine in these populations haven't been studied well. We don't have great data during pregnancy. But again, this is not a live virus vaccine, and it cannot cause disease in and of itself. And so if you're pregnant, I would encourage you to speak with your physician and have a discussion about what seems right for you. But we want to be clear, if you're pregnant, thinking about becoming pregnant or breastfeeding, you can get vaccinated with this vaccine. And part of that is a personal decision that's best for you. This is a summary of COVID-19 vaccine truths. And so just to reach through each bullet here, COVID-19 vaccines will not give you COVID-19. COVID-19 vaccines will not cause you to test positive on a PCR viral-based test or an antigen-based viral test. Antibodies might be positive after receiving vaccination based on which vaccine you get, but that's obviously the goal of a successful vaccine. People who have gotten sick with COVID-19 still will benefit from getting vaccinated. If you get vaccinated, that's going to help prevent you from getting sick with COVID-19, which is obviously our goal. Waiting to develop natural infection is not safe. You cannot predict how this virus might affect any individual. We also think that these vaccines are going to protect from spreading infection. We don't have that data, but I think there's a lot of reason to believe that will be true. And so in getting the vaccine, you'll also be protecting your community and your colleagues. And the final bullet is the research shows that this is a safe vaccine. So all the evidence we have currently really strongly supports getting vaccinated.